Soy Montserrat Peidró y estáis viendo Packside Live.
AI's here, and it is going to fundamentally change the way we work.
I could feel the chat bubbling with, when do we get hit?
It'll bring up an average performer up to a bit higher level.
It's going to change the way we are efficient. It's going to make us better.
Building a strategic AI plan, I think, is really kind of a starting focus we're kind of having.
As we go forward with AI for a customer, for an MSP, we need to ensure that our customers have a very strong security posture.
Where's your data coming from? How are you getting it back out again? Are you really set up for success when it comes to structured AI implementation?
Do we have the right controls in place? The cybersecurity landscape is constantly evolving.
We at Packside want to help our partners to get in front of their customers early and have the right conversations about how to move forward into these AI technologies.
Get involved with us. That's the best way to do it.
Yes, you do have to use separate passwords for everything. Yes, where possible, SSO is probably safer. You should likely use a password manager.
How do I move through this world with very little imprint, leaving as few breadcrumbs as possible?
If we can show folks what that cyber hygiene is supposed to be, we can help change the culture and the mindset and how we approach things.
Every client you add as a result of the role you play within their organization is a risk that you cannot get rid of.
Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the game on Packside Live, the show where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. We have a really cool episode this week. We're going to play a little bit of whodunit, review one of the most ridiculous news articles I've read in my life, and talk a little bit about cloud incidents and figure out, like, what do you do in a cloud incident? What is a cloud incident? And see how far we get down this rabbit hole. But before we do that, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Join us in the chat. Don't forget that YouTube, Packside Cloud on YouTube is the best place to join us so that you can interact with us. We can put your comments on the screen. We would love for you to join the conversation because I think everyone who watches the game is a stakeholder in this conversation. Don't forget to sign up for Packside Beyond, and let's jump straight into the news.
Dom, before we pull into this first article, I've got to say, congratulations, brother. You just passed your CISSP. You, in the UK, I think, have the approximation of a master's degree in cybersecurity based on that statement. And I'm even more pleased that I got to actually sign. Yeah, go search it out. Yeah, I actually am happy and privileged to have been able to sign yours and send in that for my recommendation, which was really neat. So, and Eddie Phillips said, congrats on your CISSP, Dom. So I just wanted to read that out from LinkedIn. And Eddie, join us over on the Packside YouTube cloud. And we can have your comments pop up. So, there he is. Eddie Phillips just did that over there. So we can bring that up on screen here in a bit. All right. Congrats, brother. That's a hard test. Did you find it hard or no?
I had the knowledge down, I feel like, but what really threw me was that they changed domains almost every question. So you're going straight out of which encryption algorithm is best to like what step
to how tall is a fence
right now.
Like,
yeah. So that was the
and
hard
how
part
thick
of
should
it.
a fence be? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun. Well, good stuff, man. I'm glad you did. I actually think if anybody's out there and they're afraid to take the test, what would you say to them, Dom? Like, should they go ahead and take it? And what would be your advice? I gave you my advice.
Just do it. I mean, I found that there were no real surprises based on the studying I had done. They are refreshing it on the 15th, so if you've been studying, you need to get it done because they're refreshing it. But I would say just do it. Like, if you fail your first try, it's not the end of the world. Just do it again, right? So that would be my advice. Just do it.
And I just saw on their webpage that they do have an amnesty program on taking and retaking that's on their main webpage right now. So if you are
you can get a 2 for 1.
Yeah. It's awesome, man. Well, congratulations. Okay, let's get to bad news then, since we've done our good news. You want to kick off the Indian government's cloud there, brother?
Yeah. This Indian government's cloud spilled citizens' personal data online for years. So the Indian government has finally resolved a years-long cybersecurity issue that exposed reams of sensitive data. I like how they chose reams as
reams. Yeah.
About its citizens. A security researcher exclusively told TechCrunch she found at least hundreds of documents containing sensitive personal information, including numbers, COVID-19 vaccination data. I'm assuming that's the equivalent to a social security number in India.
Sure.
COVID-19 vaccine data. Yeah. Passport details. Nothing secret there. So at fault was the Indian government's cloud service dubbed S3 WAS, which is built as a secure and scalable system for building and hosting Indian government
websites.
So there's not.
Yeah,
a lot
it's like
of
Project
detail
Jedi in the U.S., right?
Yeah,
yeah.
That's what I would think. So. Yeah. So they found the misconfiguration 2022 that was exposing citizens' personal information stored on S3 WAS to the open internet. So S3, typical bucket misconfiguration. Search engines indexed it, which isn't great. I think with support from digital rights organization, the Internet Freedom Foundation. They reported the incident at the time to India's CERT team. So yeah, I don't think we need to beat this article to death, but
let's zoom out on
this.
Been
a concept for a long time.
That's it. Yeah, if you look at OWASP top 10 and you start following these major failures, there's some of the critical ones, right? Like cloud misconfiguration. I spun something up. Now, the other thing I would say probably in defense of this conversation is this does come back to secure by design and secure by default, right? This understanding of why do I buy a SaaS bucket and have it already exposed public, and that has changed, right? We have seen that change in even
it's
Microsoft's
actually
behavior
nowadays
and others' behavior. So
very difficult to make something public on it. Like I do that rather frequently because I put things up there I intend to share, and it's like 4 clicks and 2 warnings if you want to make a single file public. And Azure's done similar things with storage accounts, so it has been not fixed, but it's harder to do the wrong thing, which is really all we're asking for, right?
Yeah. And here we have a, purportedly sold as secure, purportedly sold, and probably is, right? There's probably reasons you would share something publicly and not share something publicly, right? So I'm not going to blame this necessarily on the cloud system itself. But I would say it makes you think about the sensitivity of citizens' data. And if we look back, there's been other examples of this, right? The state of Louisiana with their driver's license pieces being popped during the Move It vulnerability, right? We've seen examples of this in other cases, and you now have this government entity that has misconfigured, made some mistake that if you were another private entity would be subject to lawsuits, would be subject to breach notification challenges that come from that. But as a government entity, kind of make your own rules, I suppose, in some of this stuff, and that's the thing that I would hone in on this is that it's a mistake made by a government entity.
Yeah, and if you're going to have breach notification laws for corporate entities, I think they need to be identical, if not more stringent, on government entities that are handling your entire life's worth of data. Like, as soon as you're born, you get birth certificate and social security card, right? So literally your entire life worth of data is held by the government.
I should note there's a side and tangential aspect coming with, think of the work done by Credivera up in Canada, where they're trying to minimize how much of this data is held in certain repositories like that, where instead of maybe holding all the data and proving and keeping it where you can validate and look at it, what if you certified the data and signed it, and now all you're actually looking at is the fact that you signed it, right? And now it's in this private citizen wallet or something of that nature. And I don't want to get into all the positive, negatives, up, downs of that, but it's really just this concept of saying, why do we let the data itself be the mechanism of validation, and why do we share that? And
there's an interesting growth, and this will be tangential on time, but that's okay. I was going to the airport to go to Empower, and DIA or Denver Airport just got all these upgrades. One of them was I can store my driver's license on my Google Wallet, right?
Yeah.
And then I have TSA pre-check, so that plus my boarding pass that has pre-check is on my Google Wallet. I was like, all right, I'll try this thing out. And you literally, you do an NFC tap on the little TSA terminal. And it's like, hey, you're about to share X, Y, and Z plus your boarding pass. You want to do that. You hit yes, and it Bluetooths it. And then you're through secure. I didn't have to pull out my driver's license,
right,
or my boarding pass or any of that. And it was a really cool thing because I've actually been the dude that left my driver's license with the TSA agent at
Oh yeah, Dom Kirby, would you come back to the TSA Terminal South? You've left something very important here.
And by the way, you need to go back through screening because you left the secure area.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think to your point, though, it's that on steroids, right? If you think about this now, not exactly what you said, you've put it in, the document gets validated as part of this process. And then now, as I do, my phone has been validated and fingerprinted. And as the NFC tap happens, it is sharing some validated information. But instead, take it and fast forward and imagine you aren't sharing any of that information, but rather just that it's validated and that you exist. And you start getting into being able to meet potentially anonymity and some of that data flow aspect of it, while at the same time preserving this need to validate, right? Need to verify. And so, anyways, it's I guess like tokenization in a way, right? Where you've tokenized this into a cryptographic handshake that this exists. Side tangent aside, let's get back to the next news article. But we do have a giant Indian cloud, government cloud with data breach happening. All right. So Missouri County. Now, I want to bring back that this is the state that brings us Missouri encryption. I'm sorry I had to go there, Tom. But they've declared a state of emergency and closed key offices indefinitely as it responds to what officials believe is a ransomware attack that made some of its IT systems inoperable. Jackson County has identified significant disruptions within its IT systems, potentially attributable to a ransomware attack. Officials wrote Tuesday. This is this week, Tuesday. Early indications suggest operational inconsistencies across its digital infrastructure, you think? And certain systems have been rendered inoperable while others continue to function, space for now, as normal. The systems confirmed inoperable include tax and online property payments, issuance of marriage licenses, and inmate searches. In response, the assessment, collection, and recorder of deeds offices, all county locations are closed until further notice. Like they're shutting down systems, closing down those things for now. The closure occurred at the same day the county was holding a special election to vote proposed sales tax to fund MLB's Kansas City Royals and the NFL's Kansas City Chiefs. So we're in limbo there, right? Neither the Jackson County Board of Elections nor the Kansas City Board of Elections have been affected by the attack, so those obviously were there and happening. To date, ransomware attacks have hit 28 county, municipal, tribal governments this year, according to Brett Callow, threat analyst with Imisoft. Last year, he said 95, 106 occurred in 2022. Jackson County says 654,000 residents, 607 square mile county, which includes Kansas City, its largest city in Missouri. The response to the attack, the investigations have just begun, which it obviously has, and officials said no evidence the data has been compromised. Come on. I can't even finish reading that.
All good.
Okay, we'll get back to it. It's like genuinely though. First off, I can't even finish it. I have to say that is stupid. I mean, because what you're saying is there's no evidence it's been because you haven't done the evidence collection. You're making a statement of not finding something as a statement of finding nothing, and that there's nothing there. And then you couple that with the fact that most people that are detonating ransomware have already spent the last week egressing the data. This is why we can't have nice things, Dom Kirby. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, I promise I'll be okay.
Did they check whether or not it's just base 64 encoded? This could be a really
that is my point. It might not be encrypted. They could literally just run it through Magic Chef and be fine, right? It could be. For anybody that's not clued into this, the governor of Missouri, and I'll tell the story in a very brief fashion, but a person found that some state teachers' websites were showing, in the background, just base 64 encoded information about their names, their teacher IDs, personal information. I think driver's licenses,
addresses,
there's a whole host of things, addresses, socials. They were all just base 64 encoded. And so this woman tells them about it and says, hey, listen, here, I'll show you. Here's some socials. I can show you it's easy. And if you don't know, encoding is like changing from Spanish to English, right? There's a clear translation back. It's easy. Encryption is scrambling all the letters and hoping you can put them back together. So this is encoding, which means it's not encrypted. It doesn't meet standards. And when she brought it up, she was threatened to be prosecuted, even by the government's office, the governor's office, saying, yeah, you're a hacker. and so the loving term we came up with was Missouri encryption in the InfoSec community, so it was just delicious. But anyways, exactly. Greg in the chat says, hope the hackers don't hit F12. And it did, right? Genuinely, the Missouri governor was talking about, let me show you this amazing hacking technique, F12, debugger mode. And it's nuts. Anyways, so it doesn't surprise me, but I think this is if you look at the stats, you had this 100 basically counties that are getting hit like this. And I remember back to a legislative post audit that I was involved with. And what's great is we're bringing on someone who literally has lived this world, in the government world, in that kind of tangential quasi space. So I'm excited about that for governance in this way. And I think that when we look at these governments aren't doing their due care to their citizens when it comes to the way they handle their cyber and their technology and information systems. I can say that pretty.
They did get money to fund the chiefs, so the priorities are taken.
They got the vote in. That's big. Yeah. You can't miss that, because how else are we going to see the Taylor Swift and Travis situation play out without being funded properly? So
need them tax dollars.
Okay. I'll get off this soapbox before I fall and break my neck. Let's hear from somebody much smarter than us, Robin Harris, and we'll see y'all in a few.
There is an ISOism that talks about continuous improvement. We are early in a new year, and I'd like to ask you, do you have a plan for what you're going to level up this year? Because if you don't, there's still time to put something in place. And I really like working on quarters. I even pull this into my personal life. I've got my husband doing it. We work on quarters. What are we going to accomplish this quarter? Where are we going to level up this quarter? What are we going to accomplish by the end of the year? Because time is racing by, and you might have all of these things that you think you're going to get around to. But if you don't have a plan that you're executing, you're going to get to the end of the year and maybe a lot of those items will not be accomplished. And there's a way to do it where you pace yourself. You don't want to front load everything so it's all in, Q1 or Q2. Spread things out. Set targets for every quarter. Where are you going to make improvements in your security posture? Where are you going to bring in a new tool and set up some new controls? Where are you going to, expand and play differently? It's like a playbook every year for your business. And I invite you to have it for your personal life, a playbook of how you're going to level up. And you can actually kind of it depend on, what kind of company you are or what kind of person you are. You can gamify it. You can, because sometimes we feel like, oh, there's so much to do. Oh, I've got so much to do. But when you can kind of gamify it and kind of have little rewards and incentives, like one of the things we do with our security awareness training, it's gamified. It's like game on. I'm going to beat your score. And people get excited about that kind of stuff. And we're going to have prizes. We really want to engage people and have people buy in. And one of the things we can do that is we can incentivize people, we can reward them, and we can make it more fun. And we can also acknowledge getting things done. Acknowledge you said you were going to do X and you nailed it. And you can set that whole playbook. I like having a playbook for every quarter. Every quarter there's a playbook. So that at the end of the year, you can look through and you can feel really good about what you've accomplished, how much your security posture has matured, where your people have grown. And it's a really good way to make sure you're deliberate and intentional in playing more secure and playing a bigger game.
ISOism. I think we've added that to our official dictionary.
I'm in. Forever.
Well, before we introduce Greg, we want to talk about the origin of this. So this really salacious headline from a company that reviews Android applications. Let's go. Microsoft Azure suffers the biggest security breach in its history. Mind you, this article is a couple months old at this point. Hundreds of Azure accounts, Microsoft's cloud service, would have been compromised in security breach. that has exposed critical user data to the cyber attack, which has affected multiple environments, targeted top executives of large companies. According to Proofpoint, the hacking uses the same malicious campaign detected in November of 23, which integrates credential theft through phishing methods, blah, blah, blah. The technicals aren't important here, although they're a little loaded in this article. The hackers allegedly used proxy services, no shit, to bypass geographical restrictions and mask relocation. Man, this article drives me nuts. To carry out the attack, cybercriminals embedded links, blah, blah, blah. So this is talking about, if you remember a while back, there was an incident at the Microsoft lab, and we discovered this new administrative role out of this. And not long after that, this article comes out from a group, and they said this headline. Like, wait a minute, that can't be right. And it turns out it's not. And I kind of had posted about it. I was like, this was not an Azure incident. This was a Microsoft corporate incident, which is bad nonetheless, but this is not a compromise of the Azure backend, which would have been devastating. So long story short, I mean, this article is honestly ridiculous. And we're here to talk about it, but we're also going to talk about cloud incidents in general. What's a corporate incident? What's a cloud incident? So we're not going to fixate on this article, but the topic it brings up. So Greg, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you on. Can you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
And tell us why you're here for this specific show, if you will, as well. Where your LinkedIn article that brought us to this point. So yeah, thanks, brother.
We were talking about the LinkedIn article on LinkedIn, going back and forth, basically splitting hairs and saying this article is ridiculous. My opinion of why it's ridiculous is that it's this, and you said basically the same but a little bit different. We said, this sounds like a fun thing we should talk about rather than split hairs on a bunch of comment sections. So here we are. And like you said, I can't wait to pivot away from this article because there's a lot bigger topics that are paralleling around this article that can be said much better by other organizations. So I think this is going to be fun.
Greg, tell us your background. Like, let's set the audience for what your background is. What do you do for a day-to-day? What's your history, man?
Absolutely. I've been 20 years in tech, came from a GRC practitioner background, also running enterprise tech, working with government and banks, that sort of thing. I've been about 6 years focusing on digital forensics, incident response, working with lawyers and breaches and ransomware and what happened, how they get in, how long did they go, and then having to work with the lawyers to actually disclose all that and turn it into money. Because in the end, that's kind of what drives everything. These days, focusing on SME and municipalities. Just really want to make a difference. So out there doing the good work, breaking my head against some walls here and there, but keep on trucking.
It's great you bring this up, and I think you have a perfect, purview, like I said earlier, of no pun intended on purview, sorry, Microsoft, but you have a perfect purview on where we are in this world. And so what I wanted to bring up, and Dom, you kind of set the stage for this, is, was it a Microsoft incident? Was it a Microsoft breach? Was it a client incident? Was it an us incident? Was it a Microsoft corporate incident? And let's replace Microsoft. Let's play this game a little differently. Was the MSP compromised? Was it an MSP incident?
Yes.
Was it a client incident? Was it an MSP incident that affected clients and became an MSP client-wide incident? Those are different statements. And think about Microsoft in that lens, right? You have some third-party testing app that they have that gets compromised, that doesn't necessarily have direct access to the code platform or CI/CD development lines, or right, those things. And yet they say, well, it's a breach. Well, which type, I think, is the concept. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, just for one, I just want to say that what you just described is on point, but it's also, you just built basically cyber incident Mad Libs. You basically, you sub in a different starting point, and then you describe upstream vendors. It's basically third-party risk Mad Libs, is what you just did. Perfect. We should give this to kids. Let's make a book of it.
I'm in. I'm sold.
TM.
Tom,
no one else can have it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just trademarking it for us real quick, so no one else can make it.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate you laying that in there. One of the things that we talk about, though, let's just unpack this. So the fear was Microsoft, the headline is Microsoft suffers the largest cloud breach of all time, right, or something to that effect. And then the details really make us think about, well, you said this before the show, Greg, and maybe these are your words better than mine, but it said you made you think about Microsoft since we last talked in maybe a different way. Those words were really important. What were you saying there?
Yeah. So we talk about, well, those of us who think about risk, think about what we're protecting from, what third-party vendors are we relying on, and that's the way we think of third-party risk governance. But we don't think about core infrastructure. We don't think of the foundational, our actual core infrastructure. If this was a server in the year 2000, our core infrastructure is a big metal box. Now you think of Azure, you think of M365, Intra ID, identity. These are the cores that then everything is connecting into. So how do you do risk on your core infrastructure? And maybe now you say, well, we mitigate that risk with additional pieces, which essentially are core infrastructure, is layered on top. You were bringing up layering in additional identity providers and whatnot on top. You're basically saying, well, if this identity provider gets hosed, then we got this other identity provider that's doing device identity on top of the person identity. And then I was talking with an identity auditing company recently who said, let's not talk about people, let's talk about identities. Everything is identities.
Yeah.
So now you have device identities and user identities and service identities. And
I'd like to meet that person. I agree with their statements and thoughts. So yes.
But just as a whole, how do I mitigate risk and measure risk from the core infrastructure? Especially when, like in this stupid article, they say in the biggest breach in history or something, basically the email got popped of Microsoft Core. So if you're a Microsoft employee, the bad guys were able to get into Microsoft's email. And as we know, those emails are used to then pivot into everything else. So allegedly. So if you have that identity that may not have the actual identity to get into Azure that's able to oversee all of the tenants across the board, government or private enterprise or anything else like that, however they want to split it.
Which you're hoping also has separations of duties and delineations in how someone has access and principles of least privilege.
We can double click on that. And we can double click on that for just a second, because Microsoft is overwhelmingly public about how they handled it. And they understand that, and I'm I would imagine AWS and other major hyperscalers operate similarly, that the corporate entity that is Microsoft and the people that work in it have an identity, and the people that have a reason to administer things have a separate identity down to a different device in a secured workstation. And if you want to sign an NDA with Microsoft, they'll give you the SSP. So it's also important to understand that if you don't know how this stuff works, like to an outsider who's just reading news articles, right? It looks bad because Microsoft did indeed experience an incident, and that's bad. But if you really understand how these things work, the concept of Azure and the concept of Microsoft as a corporation are two very different things.
Yeah, and should be.
But they're ran by the same people. So although there should be delineations and there should be a secure jump box, and there should be a way for you to make basically a digital version of a man trap to make sure that you can't go between Azure and Microsoft, Microsoft the employee, and Azure the secure environment that's separate from Microsoft the internal organization.
Or let's say the Indian government hosting site, or the all of those things, wherever it may be centric. Back to our news article up there. So
and since you just got your CISSP, you had a whole section on man traps. So it's the it's I like to parallel the
what size the door should be on your man trap. You need door advice. I got you.
Yeah. Right now he's on it at this point. Yeah, but I mean, let's back to the core. The core challenge, though, is the general public is not going to understand that nuance, and the article is going to just say this is what happened. But even then, you brought this up before the show, and then this understanding of what is an incident, what is an event, what is a breach, what is a right, and these words are tossed around. And Jeff Mann, if you know Jeff Mann, he'll go off on this topic, but as a curmudgeon that he is that words matter, and that we often don't understand and use them properly. And we spend an entire show for an hour just talking about words that were used wrong. And in this case, this is one of those, like, is there a breach? Well, what information was touched? What was the actual nature of that? Did they simply compromise keys, or did they peruse an egress email? Those are all statements that literally you got paid to do, right? That's the incident response and digital forensics part of the work that has to come into this that we don't necessarily have yet. And I think, to your point, maybe there was definitely some compromised information. We know that now after the fact. But can you speak towards the difference between an event and an incident and an actual breach, and what your thoughts are on that for people that are listening?
Sure. So an event is a data point that means nothing. It's if you're driving a car and you're doing 28 miles an hour down the street, that's data. That's an event. That means nothing, other than it is usable. An incident is when something is identified that needs to be looked into. You don't know how bad it is. You don't know what it really happened. It's something that needs to be looked into, and it could be ramped up or ramped down. Close the ticket or escalate the ticket. A breach is something that's outside my wheelhouse because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not allowed to use the word B word, the B word.
I love you.
Oh my God, I love you so much right now. Like, I'm in full hard hands on this one, bro. Like, I couldn't have said it any better. Yes, that's all I can say. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So
well,
I work
if we
on
double click on the
incidents
importance.
Yeah.
No, please.
Dig into the importance of the B word. Absolutely. I think that's huge.
Please. Well,
and also
an incident, right? Because we have this issue going on in, what is it, Southern California with the law firm and potentially a vendor and an
Sacramento.
MSP, where there was an event. And that event was perhaps not properly triaged, or the MSP thought it was properly triaged, there was some gap in maturity somewhere. And I don't want to speculate because it's an open case, but ultimately they missed what was an incident and became a breach, right? And the lawyers did say that, so I'm going to say it. And now there's a huge lawsuit on our hands. So the way you manage events and incidents and bringing in an IR team to perhaps declare a breach is really important.
Yeah, or to declare one not. And I'll go back to my story. We worked with Lewis Brisbane. I spent almost 18 months working with SpearTip and Coveware at the time as they were involved back then. And it took them that long to say, okay, we're willing to stand up and defend that there wasn't a touch of the data. There was no breach. This was just an incident. We're great with that. We don't have breach notification outcomes. We don't have any of these things that might come from that. Have a great day. And it took the forensics going through and saying, no, we know that this is this variant of this malware from our Evil or Revel or Sodinokibi, and we know that this was not one that did the egression capabilities. We know they never had hands on the end machines. They did this through an automated process. All of that took time, and then someone willing to stand up on the stand and argue that out, and professional witnesses that are willing to go argue through the data and say this is what happened. And I think that that's the big takeaway, and I do love that you said I'm not the one that should make the B word. Nope, that's me either. I shouldn't be. I'm not willing to sit there and argue on stand and be the attorney that's willing to defend the nuances of breach and breach notification laws that might need to be defensible. So I love you so much for saying that. I'm glad we took the minute to drill into it. So continue on, though. That's what a breach is, which you finished with. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to. We said a second ago that in order for it to be a breach, they didn't touch the data, right? That was something that was just brought up by Dom.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of cyber. Good cyber hygiene. And one of the key tenets of good cyber hygiene is know your assets. So how do you know they didn't touch the data if you don't know where your data is? And yeah, assets are computers and phones and things, but where's your stuff that you're trying to protect? And if your answer is everywhere and everything, you don't know. So in order to be able to quickly say the bad actors, the threat actor was on XYZ machines because our forensics guys said that they were on these machines, and if that's the only machines they touched, our data was over here. Therefore, we're in the clear. Otherwise, as someone who's ran forensics cases, you have to ask the company, I see this. Is this data that you need to worry about? Is this customer data? Is this PII, PHI? Is this protected? Is this regulated? And it's all industry based. So I just want to like really harp on know what you have and know your data, and asset management is so basic and so important. And it gets into that B word really heavy.
It's what's going to be on my tombstone, right? Like, I know this is a joke because my wife said she's going to cremate me anyway. So, like, hashtag what is an asset that Dom put in the chat is literally what is going to be on my tombstone. It's the locker combination right now. It's how I open my luggage.
Put it on the urn. It would look good, like in a nice.
It would look good. It'd be like, what is an asset? Clearly not this anymore.
I
digress. No, but the point is, you're right, and you hit the nail on the head. If you don't know where the asset is, I like to call the asset is the body, right? The software are the veins and then the connective tissue and the other pieces. And the data is the blood, the lifeblood of the business, the blood of all of that. And the aspect is if you don't know those components of where the body is and where the blood might be flowing and what software is using it and those things, then you can't ever say whether it was materially compromised or not, to your point. Now, one of the things I want to bring us back to topic, though, is when we're dealing with cloud providers, right? And when we're dealing with that from that perspective, we have this interesting concept of a shared responsibility starting to play out, right? And you have this nuance start to look at it from this way of like, where is that responsibility lie? When is it a Microsoft incident? When is it my incident? Is it both? And do I live with both of us having an incident to deal with, right? And why don't you speak to that a little bit, that duality, or maybe even more than that?
So just with that one there, that's definitely something that's have been thinking a lot of is when does your incident become my incident? When does that roll downstream? Does the third-party vendor have a time-based relationship to you, a time-based responsibility to you as the downstream, they're upstream from you, to report on that, so that you can have a timely response? Is their lack of urgency now your problem?
Or disclosure?
And basically,
Yeah.
Because it's maybe they had an incident and that pivoted to mean that you now have an incident. We're not even talking about the B word here. We're just talking about lateral movement. And in incidents, bad guys, threat actors, being able to pivot around an organization through the larger ecosystem of cloud is the modern way. And as they become more connected and as identity is shared, it's the real deal. This is it's blown my mind as I'm rethinking about third-party risk. Really heavy.
It is too, and mine. What's interesting about this is, and I'll take you back to the MSP example. My MSP was compromised. Our clients were compromised through that and ransomed through our tools, through our systems. There is no clearer supply chain risk definition than that statement, right? And when you get down to it, whose incident was it? Well, my insurance company felt it was mine. Now, fast forward to a Microsoft getting compromised. Their legal agreements, the way you're structured, the way they're willing to defend, the size, scope, and scale means that they're afforded a different level. And what's interesting is you see this play out in the National Cybersecurity Strategy under 3.x in the bullet points of saying we have to shift that. We can't just let someone EULA away the risk of sucking, right? And that is the first response. MSPs have very clear SLAs, have very clear contracts, have very clear service agreements, right? Have very clear understandings of what I'm going to provide, what I'm not going to provide, or lack of SLAs if that's the choice. But the point being, you're going to go down this path of saying what is in my responsibility and what's not. And what's interesting right now is we're in this weird place where those providers that you just discussed, if they get compromised, there really isn't much recourse for me. And my own incident is my own separate incident that I must insure, and it's unlikely that my incident is going to turn into a subrogation risk back to Microsoft in a class action or otherwise lawsuit today. That's the interesting part.
We have yet to see.
Replace Microsoft with anybody. I mean, not just Microsoft.
But I think the landmark's in court right now, because if we look back at Rackspace, now granted, Rackspace, in my opinion, was gross negligence, by the way. So there's other
God
factors.
Bless them. Sure was. Bless their heart, Dom.
But yeah. Anyways, there's a lot of class action happening with Rackspace, and I haven't read up on it, and I should, because it's an important case. But I don't know if judges have started to merge them or what's happening. But there's several class actions after the exchange incident, and Rackspace is a sizable cloud, certainly not a hyperscaler, but they're a sizable cloud provider. So I think we'll start to see, if these cases don't just settle out, we'll start to see some level of groundwork be set for case law. I'm like, what the hell happens what if someone deletes insert hyperscaler cloud service here, which is effectively what happened with their HEX server or their host exchange server, right?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting. I think we just don't have the groundwork. Like everything else in cybersecurity, there's very little legal footing. We don't know what would happen if there was a major Microsoft or Azure type cloud incident.
In my mind, I would define my own incident. I would track it as an incident. If we were down the path where I actually had compromise, right, I would engage my own panel or my own insurance or my own separate incident response teams. And, one of the things that we talked about before is, MSPs are saying clients won't do this, right? And they don't do incident response. They don't do those things. Let's tackle that topic for a bit. Like, I forced them to. I'll just tell you how I handled it, right? If we had an incident where we knew something was coming up, let's say they had a business email compromise, but no loss, right? The emails that went out to others. And they said, hey, Matt, are we good? I wouldn't answer that. We would say, listen, we can do containment. We can go in and reset tokens. We have a process to gather a little bit of the forensics of what's going on inside the logs if they exist. Like, we can do that, but we're not going to make that decision. If you want to find out and you have insurance, you want to go down that path and have somebody see if you define this as an incident so you can maintain insurability of it, we're willing to help you down that path. If you're not, I have a quote from a incident response team that I have marked up that I'm going to sell you and you are going to pay it. But if you don't do either of those, I'm going to document it, and I'm not going to say that I've made the decision to fumble through your logs and tell you whether or not you had a compromise after Microsoft had a cert signing problem, right? Like, that's not my role, my job. And I think that's where I'd love some input, maybe discourse even, on my approach to this is we sold it to them, and if they didn't take it, we documented it and moved on, but we weren't going to be the expert when we weren't the expert on that. What are your thoughts, either of you?
Sure. Well, I think a big piece right here is looking at liability. And by you saying yourself that I'm not the right organization to look through those logs and to do threat hunting and to really go through the organization and give an all clear, or give a timeline of what happened when and where and what left the organization, then you're taking, by you writing that report, you're taking on the liability of writing that report. And your organization is, and your insurance is, and so if you were wrong, that's going to blow back on you. It would be well-meaning. There's a good, strong reasons why you, as a rule, won't do that. So it comes down to liability, and again, just like we don't use the B word, we should also not be the end thinking on that, and you just go over to your outside counsel and say, hey, this happened to one of my clients. It was in an organization that I set up and I manage. Here is the contracts we have with them. Should we take this on, or should we engage with their attorney and with their breach coach and their insurance company? And that's usually what they're going to say. They're going to say, I mean, imagine that you're in a 10-car traffic pileup, right, end to end, one car hitting another, or if someone forgot to brake, and on it goes. If you're at the front, do you sue all 14 cars behind you? No, you sue the car behind you, and they sue the car behind them, and on and on and on, and it rolls all the way upstream. And that's the way that you manage these pieces. You say, what's in my direct rearview mirror, and that's what I have to deal with.
That's a perfect analogy, brother. Like, that's beautiful. Yeah, go ahead, Dom. Sorry.
When I was newer at this, I did fumble through plenty of times the whole, oh crap, okay, I set up a forwarder, let me go and do that, let me go figure out. But when I actually, started learning this academically and got into incident response and liability, and paid for a lot of talking time with my lawyers so I understood what all this meant, I realized how much trouble I could have gotten. And so the talking line I ended up taking was, it would be inappropriate for me as your IT company to investigate this incident because I will be biased. I was the one responsible for your defensive, right? Your the protect part of your security. I am going to write a report because I'm a human that makes me look better than I probably was in this. So you need a third-party incident responder. I can find you one. You can find one, or through insurance, but I cannot objectively write, or it would be inappropriate for me to try to objectively write a report on that, right? And no judge in the world would take that. They'd be like, no, you were getting paid, right?
You have a vested interest. You're not an impartial party to this incident. You're a named person in this incident. In my business, incident response, and working with these lawyers all the time, if I have dealings with one of the sides, which sometimes I do, maybe through another deal or with a cloud vendor that I've worked with, or I have money exchanging hands, I have to recuse myself from the case and say, I'm sorry, but we have a conflict of interest. I have to disclose that. And if you guys believe that it's a conflict, then I'm just going to step down, and I can make some great referrals, but I can't handle this.
Yeah. And you see it in large companies, right? Why does somebody bring in a Mandiant or an incident response team to have that? It's to have that public trust. It's to have the trust of the person that's investigating it to be somewhat impartial. Now, they're getting paid, so take it with a grain of salt. But ultimately, there is significantly more separation than if I'm defending my company's interests in writing.
Actually, though, I paid my attorney good money to give legal advice and legal counsel, but they have a professional obligation to be impartial in the way that they practice their profession. And I think if I'm hiring
and same with D for
a professional
humans,
incident
right?
response
100%.
firm, right? Like they have a professional obligation. So I'm paying them in the hopes that they will be impartial so that I can benefit from that report, right? Or my customer, whoever
Brother,
comes out
I'm
of
not
that.
going to tell you a lie here. No, I'm not going to tell you a lie. I got on every single call with SpearTip and my attorney begging the data to match what I wanted it to match. I'm not going to lie. Like, that was my interest. That was my discussion.
But you're human. Like,
no,
that is, that should be your interest.
Yeah. So,
like,
okay,
and
I just wanted to put that out. Yeah.
That's why SpearTip was there, right? Like, that is
100%.
You could not have ethically written that report. There's no way.
No. It would have been way
Well,
too much conflict.
Microsoft has an IR team. Microsoft has Microsoft Incident Response. I don't think it would be. I don't think it'd be prudent for Microsoft Incident Response to do the IR on these recent incidents. Call in Mandiant. Call in CrowdStrike. I don't know. Call in someone, but don't call in someone that has your own company's name in the front.
So, how do MSPs make
love you,
money
Dart team,
off
but
this
work on other people's
conversation?
incidents.
Yeah. Well, how does that? Well, I want to ask this question though. I want to turn this topic for this next few minutes to this. How do MSPs make money out of this? I've already kind of described mine. Is that I was ready to sell them an incident response. I was ready to sell them my man hours or human hours for those things that were part of an incident that the insurance was paying for and separate of my traditional contract. What are your thoughts on how do MSPs take this and make it a story of revenue, or even a story of revenue for that end client, and why they should do the incident response in that aspect? Help me out with that, either of you.
Well, what's your guys' opinion of having a commission structure in place with an IR company that you can refer to?
Big fan.
Yeah.
I actually marked mine up. I literally made them askew and marked them up. Right? We would put our margin on top of those incident responses we would resell. And which was tough, right? Because you do them in block hours and you do them in hours that could be delineable, but we would mark up the hours is how we did it. I'm a big fan of it from that regard.
I have no issue with it.
No.
I mean, I had friends that were business attorneys, but not my attorney, because obviously there'd been a conflict, but I referred to attorneys and I got money back for, right? And I think it's the same. Or we had Alex on and we talked about this partnership with the virtual compliance officer offering she has.
Yeah.
I think it's one, it's a good thing because I'm running a business, but two, I don't think it's unethical. I think we have an established relationship. I've vetted them. I'm going to make a buck, but they're also going to do a great job for you.
And just as a note, you can't get a referral fee from a lawyer, but lawyers can give referral fees to each other. So you can have them refer over to another breach coach, but they can't take a referral fee from us as commoners, non-legal practitioners.
It's fair.
They have all these bars and stuff they have to go to.
But the point of your question about the incident response and having somebody on the side, that was tough and probably still is tough to find a good incident response team that's going to respond quickly, that's going to be fair and priced well, that's going to scale to the type of client you're dealing with potentially. And getting one of those in place and then having a good relationship with them is very critical in a limited resource challenge, right? And so I would like to have those, like Solace is a great example, your services, like those things, have those people ready so that you can say, hey, I've sent you 6 of them. I'm your friend. I'm generating revenue for you. I'm large enough to help. And this goes back to a strategy I've always employed in general, which is, right, the very public carrot and stick methodology, if you have to, right? And it's in feeding business to that organization and getting them to be larger and growing together as partners so that you can expect to extract partnership the other direction if necessary, right? And have them to say, listen, I have a really bad one where I need them back up. It's very critical. Can we move this forward in your caseload? Do we have that kind of relationship? And, I think there's some strategy in having a couple of those IR teams already ready. a structure ready, a SKU ready in your platform, a pricing structure and understood, and I'll even tell them myself, I'm part of the emergency response team for CompTIA, and I took a incident from an MSP, and he had a single client that was dealing with a pretty major incident, but it was 60 devices. And I took a gut guess at where I thought the incident response was going to be, and which, number one mistake, first, don't do that. That's the first thing I'll just say right now. You'll learn that lesson. And I said, I think it's probably going to be about 15 grand. And he got a quote for 80,000. And it was the nature of it, the nuance of it, the difference of what evidence needed to be collected, the type of data that was there, how many machines needed actual forensics evidence collection, right? And that space of it, and doing your former job, right, Greg, into this, or job digging into the data and digging into the forensics. And so one of the things is go ahead and start getting those expectations. You could even model those for your clients and say, hey, what's the number of machines for every client? What's the number of humans for every client? What kind of data do they handle? And maybe getting some upfront understandings of what kind of retainers that might be. Oh, Matt, that type of client fits in our mid-size bucket, which means it's going to be about this many hours of retainer. Can you speak towards any of that, or help educate the MSP any more around that side of the incident response and prep kind of thing?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I would say the first and foremost is it pivots into one of the something that MSPs have been hearing a lot about lately, which is cyber insurance prep. Because you can't talk IR without talking cyber insurance. And if
true.
And before an IR can start, you need to check to make sure that the IR company is being covered by the cyber insurance, or that they don't have cyber insurance at all, and this is going to be an out of pocket piece. And those talks have to be with the outside counsel. Man, I keep on rinse and repeat on talking about lawyers. I must love them or something. But the outside counsel will say, you are in a regulated space and you must do this because if breach notifications don't go out, you're going to have these penalties. If they do go out, then you're going to have these very, very limited, much smaller penalties. If I'm talking like HIPAA or something.
Right. Plus the cost of the notification, obviously. Yeah.
The cost of notification is trivial compared to the cost of not notifying. A lot of companies a lot of small companies try to avoid the notifications if they can, thinking it's going to be bad press. It is bad press. You have to handle it. Make PR one of your preparations. But the cost of not notifying is monstrously painful. The cost of notifying is expensive, normal people expensive, not kill your whole company expensive. But yeah, having those SKUs with the IR is great. And I think it's important to say, you are protecting this data. You have this much you have this many users, you have this many devices. In the case of an incident, these are the sort of costs that you should expect. So now you can do a cost-benefit analysis, which allows you to now do more preventative services because the cost of an incident happening is this. And as a CISSP, as a security practitioner, we have to understand money, we have to understand revenue, we have to understand business, and we have to understand all that security stuff, which is a giant, room.
Pile.
So, and if you don't mind, I'd like to just pivot back to the news and what you talked about earlier in terms of tokenization and why do we let the data itself be the mechanism of validation, which I thought was a really good point. And it really comes down to, why are you holding the data? Why is it accessible? Why is it accessible via a web interface? Why is it accessible in your database? Why are you holding it?
Preach it, brother.
I learned my knowledge about privacy from this lady named Michelle Dennedy. She's on LinkedIn. She's amazing. She's chief privacy officer of all sorts of giant companies, and now she's working for a company that does privacy. A privacy look at your company to see what kind of data you have, what sort of risk it has. And she coined this term that I love. She said, if you have a data lake, you need to manage your data so that it doesn't become a data swamp. That data that you're holding is a liability. Every bit of data has a cost accounted to it, and it's not the cost of the hard drive. It's the cost of the overhead, the IR planning, the IR that happens, the how much do you have to exfil, or how much could be damaging your company over there? So if that data isn't actually making you money, if that data is not actually part of your business, get it out of here. You can't exfiltrate data that doesn't exist. And in the case of the news piece, why are you transferring data when you could just have proof that you've Jordy checked it. Someone has checked it, and cryptographically, I can prove that it's been checked by this person. So you don't need to see the data, because this other thing has already proven that it's been checked.
You might get a check from Credivera. That's their entire mission statement. So you might get them sending you a check down the road. But that's their whole assertion.
I love
is
databases.
That piece of it. Yeah. And then the other piece of it, think of it this way. There's no other scenario where I could be like, hey, producer Steve, I want you to like hold on to my car and like you can use it for your own purposes and such. But if it gets stolen, like there's no recourse for me. Right? Like, no worries, I'll deal with the expense of it. Right? But in data, that's the way it is. I'm like handing you my social and my date of birth and all this information. If it gets stolen, like, well, sorry, bro, I had to notify you. Have a nice day. Right? And you get into maybe some credit monitoring and things that come out of that. But I guess for the analogy's sake, is we live in that world today, and that is the gap. And now to the point of bringing it all the way back to a Microsoft and this conversation about, you know, these infrastructural third-party risks that are so critical and massive is that's literally the way the contracts lay today, right? For the most part. And what can we do? And I wanted to close out with this, which, you know, if your argument is, man, they're going to have problems, the Microsoft, the Azures, the Googles, the hyperscalers of the world are going to be compromised, and that may trickle down to me, and how is that incident going to play out? You said something so brilliant before we got started in this show, which is, like, we need to focus on the basic hygiene things. We need to focus on the things we can do and we can deal with today. Maybe let's focus on that. What can you do in cloud to manage that? Like I think you said before the show, risk models and tracking software about things and, you know, your phone back. Like we were just talking about those things. Focus on the things we can do. What are your thoughts on that with cloud?
Sure. So let's talk about mitigations, which is the fancy CISSP way of saying what can you do. Detective controls. So you got Sentinel and Splunk and Logarithm and things like that. Like let's keep an eye on what's happening in my environment, because upstream I can't protect it. Hopefully they'll give me a call when something bad happens, but I can't count on that. Contractually I can, but in reality, right? Preventative controls. So you have cloud configuration assessment tools. There's all sorts of great platforms that'll help you figure out if you have misconfigured cloud configurations, open buckets, or bad identity.
Talking to you, Indian government. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. Jesus. You can talk about, okay, well, for the gaps that I can't do, you can do transference of risk. So you can say we're going to buy more insurance. We're going to make sure that this covers these different kind of breaches. If we're handling large amounts of money, make sure that it covers the amount of money we're holding. Or you can just say it is what it is, and I can accept it. Right? Accept the risk. Yeah. And you have to do that with open eyes.
I want to go back for me because I only have the one that I can point in one direction. But I want to go back to what you said about this earlier on the show of this, we had the event. Think about when Microsoft was doing their signing cert stuff and we were dealing with the fact that maybe someone compromised my environment. Did we have anybody touch it? And the argument going back is, why is this the first time you realize you've never looked at the logs? Or that logging's not turned on, or that you don't have purview. I mean, remember the panic of, we don't have purview to this. Well, nor have you ever asked for the license or bought it to do that because you've never cared. And so you start getting to this world of, should people be doing more detective things, I think, as you said, and looking at these logs ahead of time so that we can start finding when those things are sus, right?
Well, I saw another thing from Daniel Card over on Twitter. He posted that out of the box for a business premium based Microsoft 365 environment, you get a 33.3% security score. In order to get to a 100% security score on the Microsoft way of modeling that, you basically have to buy every piece of product that they sell, every security product they sell in order to get to 100. So so you basically can't afford to have perfect security. So you have to just define what's good enough and do it with open eyes. And if you can't afford it, then maybe you shouldn't be in there. Maybe you have to do it a different way.
Right.
Maybe you have to do less. Maybe you can't afford.
That sounds like
risk.
A lot of risk analysis. Man, that sounds like classic risk analysis is what seems like you're preaching here.
Yeah, absolutely. I hate the word cybersecurity. I think it means nothing. I think it confuses everyone. I think cyber risk is more apt and transfers it over to automobiles and houses and slip and falls and everything else, because we understand risk, but all of a sudden computers are different. No, they're not different. Information is not different. 100%. It's just risk.
I don't know that I could think of a better way to close out this show from that perspective. So I would just say, if you want to follow more, how can people reach you, Greg? Follow you on LinkedIn. What else? What would you suggest?
You got Dasgrog, DASGROG on X. I hate that. or /Greg Kutzbach on LinkedIn.
And we'll put that down in the bottom. Thanks, Greg, for being here. What an awesome conversation and show. We delved all over the place for any of our watchers and listeners here that are with us, but hopefully we centered around and provided some value for you. Thanks for being here, Greg. Dom, if you want to close us out.
Greg, thanks for joining us. It's been a great show to wrap up a pretty good week. That's the show for the week. I hope you all enjoyed it. Again, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. Don't forget to join us next week. We have Keith Bartold coming on. I think we have some footage from some stuff Matt did with that. May or may not have been puke involved. I'm just kidding. I think you may have.
It's possible. It's possible. I may have made it, may not. We'll find out.
So make sure you join us next week if you want to find out the answer to that question, and we'll see you then.